So we'll talk about movement first, and then we'll start adding in exercise and sports performance on top of that, because we will kind of build it. It will kind of mold into each other. So with regards to movement, so obviously movement is dynamic. We can move forwards and back, we can move sideways, and we can move in a rotation. So what's happening with all of that is, as we move forwards and back, load is being distributed throughout the core. As we move side to side, load is being moved throughout the core, but this time in a different direction. And when we rotate, load is being moved in a different direction. So our bracing needs to be dynamic as well. So what we need to be able to do is build that with exercise. We need to be able to build that dynamic loading of the torso. So when we talk about exercise, we need to train, number one, in forwards and back movements, which is what most of exercises are and what most of exercises do. But we also need to do it in the sideways movement and in the rotation movement. So we need to build that, because, for example, if I take the first exercise, the plank, that's going to load a lot of the front and the back of the core. If we then do a side plank, that's going to load most of the left and the right of the core, depending on which side you do the side plank. When we do a chopping type of movement, which is a rotation, it's going to move from the side to the front, back to the side again, and vice versa when we do the chopping movement. So what we need to be able to do is train the core in all of these different planes, so that when we go into movement in everyday life, could be carrying shopping bags, could be carrying a suitcase on one side, could be carrying shopping bags on both sides, could be carrying a child on one side, could be carrying a child on your shoulders, whatever it may be. There's all these different things. It could be lifting up lifting up shopping bags, could be lifting a box out of the back of a car. All these different things need to be taken into consideration when it comes to training and developing the torso. So as I mentioned in part 2, the first thing we need to be able to do is brace appropriately. So if it's a light dynamic movement like walking, for example, then we need to brace lightly. So again, we can consciously do that, and then eventually, as the body understands what it's doing, it will start to do that more naturally. So we go from that sort of conscious training to like an unconscious type of training, if you will. So we've got the dynamic loading, and we've got the appropriate bracing. The next thing that we have is when it comes into more sporting performance. So these are, say, quick movements, like a throw, for example. The core needs to be tuned. So what I've talked about so far is consciously locking the torso, and certainly in a plank and a side plank, holding that position. For walking, bracing lightly, holding that position and walking. When it comes to things like a sporting performance, which is much quicker, much more unconscious in some regards, the core needs to be tuned so it's able to do that in and of itself, because you're not going to have the time to think about it. So we need to tune the core to work very quickly. So what that means, if we take the throwing movement as an example, so most people think you throw with your arm, but what you're actually doing is you're throwing with your whole body, and it will start from sort of the hips and the lower body. So there's going to be a huge rotation through the hips, which is then going to transfer that up through the torso, down the arm, and if you've got a ball in your hand, through the hand to the ball and to wherever it's going. So it's a whole body movement. So what needs to happen is, as we sort of, prime the body and go into the sort of the backswing, if you will, you're going to tension, so the torso may be braced lightly all the way through this. So it might be braced, let's say 30% all the way through. Now, I don't know these numbers. I'm just using it as for the sake of the example. So let's just say throughout this whole throw, from the backswing all the way through, is braced 30%. So as we initiate the backswing, the core is then going to brace up to 70%. So as we initiate that backswing, it braces an extra 40% up to 70%. What then happens is as it goes back into the backswing, it will then bring that brace back down to 30%, let's say. Then as we get to the back of this backswing and we're fully, lengthened, it's going to go back up to 70%. And then as we come through the throw, it's going to come back down to 30%. And then as we let go of the ball, there's going to be another brace at the end as well. So there's essentially 1, 2, 3 braces throughout that throw. And that's what we need to tune, is the initial brace, the brace at the backswing, and the brace as we let go of the ball. So it's all the time, it's contract, relax, contract, relax. So we are bracing, but there's a tuning effect to it. And this is where we are able to move the spine. Because in the light braces, there's going to be changes in position of the spine, certainly when we throw. But when we initiate the back and the forward swing, that's when the spine locks in place for a split second, because that's where the load is, when we're changing direction during the throw. So when you hear about we have to move our spine is built to move, this, that and the other, in this specific context, it still needs the abdominal brace to be able to do so, to minimize load on it, so it's then able to perform these movements whilst minimizing risk of injury to it, if you will. So we have to take that into consideration when we're talking about it. And this is where exercise and formal sort of gym environment allows us to hone and tune that brace. So when it comes to a lift, like a deadlift, we just lock everything in, maintain a neutral spine, and we lift. And then we put the weight down. When it comes to sporting performance, because there's different dynamics to it, it's more about tuning, maintaining an initial brace, and then getting these little pulses, just where it goes 30%, jumps to 70, back down to 30, jumps to 70, back down to 30, jumps to 70, back down to 30. So hopefully what you start to gain now is an understanding more of how the brace works throughout dynamic movement, because so much of it gets lost in this argument between we should maintain a neutral spine, no we shouldn't, because our spine is built to move and we need to move our spine. So at the moment, everyone's talking about neutral spine versus movement, whereas there is no neutral spine versus movement. It depends on the context in which the spine is being used and in what way the core is being used. In a sporting environment, yes, you can move it, and in some respects, in some exercises, you can move it, but you have to have that bracing tuned to be able to deal with it so the spine doesn't get damaged, because it's that transfers the energy. And if you don't get the tuning right, you get an energy leak that comes out of the torso where the tuning isn't correct. What then happens is that reduces the performance, and some of that energy can get transferred onto the spine and give it an adverse load and an unnecessary load that can be injurious to the spine. So you kind of got all these different contexts in which it needs to be used. But what we're trying to understand mostly is how we use the torso, and it's not neutral spine versus movement of the spine, if you will. So hopefully by understanding that, you can, or by understanding what we've talked about in this whole podcast, is you could start to understand where you use the spine and how you use the spine in different contexts. So again, just to summarize everything that we've talked about, number one, a brace is initial stability to the spine. It's not the same as hollowing, because we aren't bringing tension to these elastic bands all around the spine. We're just bringing tension to some of the elastic bands around the spine, which makes it not as stable. And then when it comes to movement, we need to brace consciously first, and then that tunes the unconscious bracing, if you will. So we pre-brace or proactively brace, or whatever you want to call it. And then when it comes to movement, we need to brace appropriately to the load. So if it's a heavy load, heavy brace. If it's a light load, it's a light brace. And then when it comes to more dynamic, sporting type movements, we need to tune the brace from that 30% to 70% back to 30%. So that relaxation to contract, relax, contract, relax. And we can do that in a formal gym environment with exercise. If you go to my How to Build Core Strength and Stability program, which you can find in the link below, you can start that journey of bracing up into up through stabilizing, building endurance, building strength, and then building that tuning at the end in the more advanced workouts as well. So hopefully this episode has been helpful for you. Hopefully you've learned something new. If you have a comment, please do leave it down in the comment section below, or a question. If you've enjoyed the content, hit the like button. If you want to watch more of this, or tutorials or episodes like this, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, hit the thanks button below, and your contribution will be greatly appreciated. So that's Chris from Chris of Whole Training. I'll speak to you in the next episode.